I never imagined that my retirement dream would turn into a suburban battleground. But when Kathy Enfield slapped that $2,500 fine on my kitchen counter with a self-satisfied smile, something inside me snapped. The letter, printed on the Pinecrest Estates HOA letterhead, condemned my unsightly commercial agricultural operation, and demanded I cease all gardening activities immediately. "Mr. Steele, you've been warned repeatedly about running businesses from residential properties," she said, adjusting her pearl necklace. "The board has voted unanimously." I looked out my kitchen window at the modest vegetable garden I'd lovingly built after retiring from the army. 3 decades of military service, and now I couldn't even grow tomatoes to sell at the local farmer's market. "With all due respect, Mrs. Enfield, this isn't a commercial farm. It's a garden." She laughed, that practiced titter that never reached her eyes. "Victor, don't insult my intelligence. We've documented your truck loaded with produce every Saturday morning. That constitutes commercial activity, which violates Section 5, Paragraph 12 of our covenant." She tapped a manicured nail on the fine notice. "Payment is due within 30 days. After that, we place a lien on your property." What Kathy Enfield didn't know, what none of the Pinecrest Estates HOA board realized, was that they were picking a fight they couldn't win. Not because I was particularly confrontational, but because of what my late grandfather had made me promise before he died. "I own more than just this house, Mrs. Enfield," I said quietly. She rolled her eyes. "Your shed and swing set are also in violation, but we're addressing those separately." "No," I replied. "I meant I own Steel Valley. All of it." Her smile faltered for just a moment before recovering. "Don't be ridiculous, Victor. No one owns the valley. Now I expect prompt payment." After she left, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the fine notice. Memories of my grandfather's words echoed in my mind. "Never tell anyone about the land, Vic. Just live simply, be kind, and only reveal the truth if absolutely necessary." For 15 years, I'd honored that request, living quietly in my modest home in Pinecrest Estates, the smallest and newest of the developments that had sprung up in Steel Valley over the past 2 decades. Few people remembered that the valley had once been entirely owned by my family. Fewer still knew that when developers came knocking 20 years ago, my grandfather had only sold them construction rights, not the land itself. I'd moved into Pinecrest after retiring from the army, wanting a simple life close to the land my family had stewarded for generations. I never mentioned my ownership of the underlying property because it hadn't seemed important. The HOA collected fees for maintaining common areas, and I paid them without complaint. I followed most of their rules, kept my lawn neat, and lived peacefully. Until I started my garden. It began as therapy. After losing my wife to cancer 3 years earlier, I needed something to fill my days. The garden became my sanctuary, and sharing the bounty at the farmer's market connected me to the community. I donated half my proceeds to the local food bank. It wasn't really a business, more a hobby that paid for itself. But to Kathy Enfield, it was an opportunity. Since taking over as HOA president 18 months ago, she transformed our once friendly community into her personal fiefdom. Fines were her favorite weapon, generating revenue that somehow never seemed to improve our neighborhood. Instead, Pinecrest boasted new security cameras, a redesigned clubhouse where the board met, and mysteriously, a brand new luxury SUV in Kathy's driveway. I walked out to my garden, a modest 1/4-acre plot behind my house, and knelt in the soil. My tomatoes were coming in nicely. The sweet corn would be ready in a few weeks. Was this really worth fighting over? My phone rang. It was my old army buddy, Jake. "How's civilian life treating you, Vic?" he asked. I sighed. "The HOA just fined me $2,500 for my garden." Jake laughed. "Seriously? That little vegetable patch? What are you going to do?" "I'm not sure. I could pay it, but it feels wrong. Didn't your family own that whole valley? Can't you just tell them to pound sand?" I hadn't told many people about my inheritance, but Jake had been with me when I received the news of my grandfather's death and the shocking details of my inheritance. "It's complicated," I replied. "Legally, yes, I own the land underneath every house in this development. But the homeowners have rights too. But the HOA doesn't own anything, right? They just enforce the covenant." "True. Then maybe it's time to remind them who they're dealing with." After we hung up, I walked to my garage and pulled out the old metal lockbox my grandfather had left me. Inside were the original deeds, the limited licensing agreements with the developers, and the terms of the land trust that had been established. I'd read through them after inheriting everything, but now I studied them with new purpose. What I found surprised even me. The next morning, I drove to the county records office and spent hours verifying what I'd discovered. By afternoon, I had all the documentation I needed, neatly organized in a leather portfolio. Instead of going home, I drove to the office of Stanley Lawrence, the best real estate attorney in the county. "Let me get this straight," Stan said after reviewing my documents. "Your grandfather sold construction and residence rights to the developers, who built and sold the homes, but your family trust retained ownership of the actual land?" "That's right. And the HOA covenant, which homeowners signed when purchasing, only covers the structures and surface rights, not the underlying property." "Exactly." Stan leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Victor, this is fascinating. The HOA has been operating as though they have authority over the entire property, when legally, their jurisdiction ends at the surface level." "What about my garden? Can they fine me for it?" "They can try," Stan said, "but they'd have a hard time enforcing it if you challenge them. The covenant restricts business operations, but since you own the land itself, you have agricultural rights that supersede HOA regulations, as long as you're not violating county ordinances." "I'm not." "I checked." "Then you're on solid legal ground." He closed the portfolio. "But tread carefully. HOAs can make life miserable for homeowners who challenge them, even when the homeowners are right." I nodded. "I know. That's why I've always kept quiet about owning the land." "What changed?" "They've gone too far. It's not just me, they've been targeting elderly residents, young families, anyone vulnerable. Last month, they fined Mrs. Patterson, a 78-year-old widow, for having a bird feeder. Before that, they threatened the Gonzalez family with daily fines until they removed their children's basketball hoop." Stan's expression darkened. "That doesn't surprise me. We've had several clients from Pinecrest Estates recently. Your HOA has become quite aggressive. I think there's more to it than just power. Something feels wrong about how they're spending the money. If you suspect financial impropriety, that's a separate issue," Stan warned. "Proving it would require evidence." I left Stan's office with a plan. I wouldn't immediately reveal my ownership of the valley. That was my nuclear option. First, I would formally contest the fine and request financial records from the HOA, as was my right as a member. The next day, I submitted my formal appeal and records request. 3 days later, I received a terse email from Kathy Enfield denying both. "Your appeal lacks merit," she wrote. "As for financial records, the annual statement provided at the neighborhood meeting satisfies our transparency requirements." I had attended that meeting. The financial statement had been a single slide showing basic income and expense categories, with no detail on how the money was actually spent. That evening, there was a knock at my door. It was Linda Martinez, the young mother who lived 2 doors down. "Mr. Steele? I heard you're fighting the HOA," she said nervously. "Is that true?" I invited her in. Over coffee, Linda confided that she and several other neighbors had also received questionable fines recently. "They fined us $500 for having my mother's car in our driveway for 2 weeks while she was visiting from Mexico," Linda explained. "We paid because we couldn't afford to fight it, but it meant my daughter couldn't attend her dance camp this summer." By the end of our conversation, Linda had given me the names of 12 other homeowners with similar experiences. The next day, I visited each one, collecting their stories and documenting the fines they'd paid. A pattern emerged. Since Kathy took over, fine revenue had increased by over 400%. Most targeted were elderly residents, single parents, and families who couldn't easily fight back. None of the board members had ever received fines, despite visible violations of the same rules. On Saturday morning, I set up my usual stand at the farmer's market, despite the HOA fine hanging over my head. To my surprise, nearly 20 of my neighbors showed up to buy vegetables and expressed their support. Word had spread about my challenge to Kathy's authority. I was wrapping up sales when Kathy appeared, flanked by 2 other board members, Jeffrey Pierce and Megan Wilson. "This is blatant defiance," Kathy said loudly, causing nearby shoppers to turn and stare. "You were ordered to cease your commercial activities." I continued packing my unsold produce. "I'm appealing the fine, Mrs. Enfield. Until that process is complete, I'm continuing as normal." "Your appeal was denied," she snapped. "Not properly," I replied. "According to the covenant, I'm entitled to a hearing before the full board with at least 3 days' notice. I received neither." Jeffrey stepped forward. "Victor, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Just pay the fine and stop selling vegetables. Half my proceeds go to the food bank," I said, gesturing to my sign that clearly stated this fact. "The other half covers my costs. I'm not getting rich here." Megan, at least, had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Perhaps we could discuss a compromise." "There is no compromise," Kathy interrupted. "Rules are rules. If we make an exception for Mr. Steele, everyone will expect special treatment." I finished packing and faced them squarely. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for fair treatment, for myself and for everyone in Pinecrest Estates." Kathy's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means I know about the selective enforcement. The excessive fines targeted at those least able to fight back. The lack of financial transparency." "How dare you!" Kathy's voice rose, drawing more attention. "Are you accusing us of something illegal?" "I'm stating facts," I said calmly. "And requesting what I'm entitled to as a homeowner, a fair appeals process and access to detailed financial records." Jeffrey placed a restraining hand on Kathy's arm. "This isn't the place for this discussion." "Fine," Kathy said, regaining her composure. "You want a hearing? You'll get one. Monday evening, 7 p.m., at the clubhouse. And Mr. Steele?" Her smile was cold. "Bring your checkbook." They walked away, but not before I heard Kathy whisper to Jeffrey, "Start the lien paperwork. I want his house." That confirmed my suspicions. This wasn't just about my garden or enforcing rules. Kathy wanted my property. I spent the rest of the weekend gathering evidence and preparing my case with Stan's help. On Monday morning, I filed a formal complaint with the county about potential financial misconduct in the HOA, requesting an audit. That evening, I arrived at the clubhouse 15 minutes early. To my surprise, the parking lot was nearly full. Inside, at least 40 homeowners were seated in the meeting room, far more than typically attended HOA meetings. Linda Martinez waved me over. "We spread the word," she whispered. "Everyone wants to see you take on Kathy." The board members entered and took their seats at the front table, looking surprised by the turnout. Kathy called the meeting to order, her voice tight with irritation. "We're here to address Mr. Steele's appeal of his fine for operating a business from his residence," she announced. "This should be brief. The covenant clearly prohibits commercial activities." "May I present my case?" I asked, standing. "You have 3 minutes," Kathy replied. I opened my portfolio. "First, I'd like to clarify that my garden is primarily a hobby and charitable endeavor, not a business. Over half the proceeds go directly to the county food bank." I handed copies of my donation receipts to the board members. "The remainder barely covers my costs for seeds, tools, and materials." Jeffrey glanced at the receipts. "Admirable, but irrelevant. Any commercial activity is prohibited. Second," I continued, "I've documented 17 cases of selective enforcement over the past year." I distributed a spreadsheet showing the pattern of fines. "Certain homeowners are targeted repeatedly, while others with identical violations receive no penalties. Murmurs rose from the audience. Kathy rapped her gavel. That's not relevant to your specific case, Mr. Steele. It speaks to the broader issue of how the covenant is being applied. I countered. But let me move to my third point, which directly addresses my fine. I withdrew the final document from my portfolio, a certified copy of the original land deed and trust agreement. The HOA covenant governs the use of homes and surface property in Pinecrest Estates. However, it does not govern the use of the land itself, because the HOA doesn't own or control the land. Kathy scoffed. Of course the homeowners own their land. It came with the purchase of their homes. No, I said firmly. The developers never owned the land to sell. They purchased construction and residence rights from the Steele Family Trust, which retained ownership of the actual property. The room went completely silent. I placed the deed on the table. The Steele Family Trust still owns the entirety of Steele Valley, including the land beneath every home in Pinecrest Estates. The trust grants homeowners permanent residence rights but retains agricultural and mineral rights to the land itself. Megan picked up the deed, her eyes widening as she read. This appears legitimate, she said slowly. Jeffrey snatched it from her. This can't be right. We would have known. It was never hidden, I replied. It's in the county records. It's referenced in the fine print of every home sale in this development. Most people just never read that far, or assumed it was standard legal language. Kathy's face had gone pale. And who controls this trust now? I met her gaze steadily. I do. I'm the sole trustee and beneficiary, as the last living Steele. The room erupted in conversation. I waited until Kathy restored order before continuing. I'm not here to disrupt anyone's life or claim any special privileges. I've lived quietly among you for years, paying my HOA fees like everyone else. I only bring this up now because the current board has overstepped its authority, not just with me, but with many residents. I turned to address the room. The HOA has legitimate functions, maintaining common areas, ensuring basic standards for our community. But it doesn't have the right to prevent me from growing vegetables on land that I own. It doesn't have the right to selectively target vulnerable homeowners with excessive fines. And it certainly doesn't have the right to operate without financial transparency. Linda stood up from the audience. I want to know where our money is going. The playground equipment is broken, the community pool needs repairs, but somehow we're spending thousands on new security cameras that only watch the board members' homes. Others joined in, voicing similar complaints. The meeting was rapidly spiraling out of Kathy's control. Jeffrey leaned over to whisper urgently to Kathy, who looked increasingly cornered. Finally, she banged her gavel repeatedly. This meeting is about Mr. Steele's fine, nothing more. We'll address other concerns at the appropriate time. Actually, I said, according to HOA bylaws, any homeowner can motion to expand the agenda if seconded and approved by majority vote of attending members. Linda immediately stood. I motion to expand tonight's agenda to include a full financial review and vote of confidence in the current board. I second, called another homeowner. All in favor? I asked. Nearly every hand in the room went up. Kathy's composure finally broke. This is ridiculous. You can't just, it's in the bylaws, Kathy. Megan interrupted quietly. They have the right. For the next 2 hours, the meeting transformed into something the Pinecrest Estates HOA had never seen before, a genuine democratic process. Homeowners spoke about their experiences with arbitrary fines. I presented my findings about the pattern of enforcement. And most damaging, when pressed, Kathy could not explain several large expenditures that appeared in the checkbook but not in the annual report. $20,000 for community improvements? One homeowner questioned. What improvements? The security system, Kathy replied stiffly. The bid for that system was only $12,000, countered another resident who worked in security. I know because I submitted a competing bid that was rejected without review. As the questions mounted, Kathy's responses became increasingly defensive and contradictory. Jeffrey remained stonily silent, while Megan looked increasingly troubled. Finally, Megan spoke up. I think we should adjourn and reconvene when we can present complete financial records. I agree, I said. But first, I move that Mr. Steele's fine be rescinded pending further review. Jeffrey surprisingly seconded this motion, perhaps sensing which way the wind was blowing, and it passed overwhelmingly. As the meeting broke up, I was surrounded by neighbors thanking me for speaking up. Kathy and Jeffrey quickly left, but Megan approached me. I didn't know, she said quietly, about the land or about how the fines were being targeted. I just joined the board 6 months ago because I wanted to help the community. I believe you, I replied. And I'm not looking to cause problems. I just want fairness and transparency. She nodded. There are things I've questioned, decisions I was outvoted on. Maybe we should talk privately. We arranged to meet the following day at a coffee shop outside the development. When Megan arrived, she brought a flash drive. I copied the HOA's financial records, she said, her voice low. I couldn't sleep last night after the meeting. Some of the things people were saying. I started looking more closely at our accounts. She slid the drive across the table. I think you need to see this. The files revealed what I had suspected but couldn't prove: systematic financial misconduct. Over the past 18 months, nearly $180,000 in HOA fees and fines had been collected, but less than half had gone to legitimate community expenses. The rest had been diverted through a labyrinth of fake vendor payments that ultimately led to a shell company, Enfield Consulting. Kathy's been embezzling, Megan said, her voice shaking. And Jeffrey knows. He's the one who signs off on the transfers. Have you spoken to them about this? I asked. She shook her head. I'm afraid to. Kathy has a temper. And connections. Her brother-in-law is a police detective. I took the flash drive. This needs to go to the authorities. I know, she replied. That's why I brought it to you. That afternoon, Stan and I took the evidence to the district attorney's office. The financial crimes prosecutor reviewed the documents and agreed there was sufficient evidence to open an investigation. However, she cautioned that it would take time to build a case. In the meantime, she advised, say nothing about this to anyone, especially Kathy or Jeffrey. We need to track the money flows before they can cover their tracks. For the next 3 weeks, life in Pinecrest Estates took on a strange quality. The HOA board announced a temporary suspension of all outstanding fines pending a comprehensive policy review. I continued my garden and farmers market sales without interference. Neighbors who had once barely spoken began gathering in yards and driveways, sharing stories about their experiences with the HOA. Kathy and Jeffrey were noticeably absent from community spaces. When they did appear, they were polite but distant, clearly aware that something had shifted in the neighborhood's power dynamic. Then, early one morning, I was awakened by pounding on my door. It was Linda, breathless and upset. They're towing Mrs. Patterson's car, she exclaimed. Kathy and Jeffrey are out there with a tow truck, claiming she violated parking regulations. I hurriedly dressed and followed Linda down the street. Sure enough, Mrs. Patterson's modest sedan was hooked up to a tow truck, while the elderly woman stood on her driveway in her bathrobe, tears streaming down her face. Kathy stood nearby with Jeffrey, a clipboard in hand. What's going on here? I demanded. Kathy turned, her smile venomous. Enforcing the rules, Mr. Steele. Mrs. Patterson's vehicle registration expired 3 days ago. Section 8, paragraph 3 clearly states that all vehicles must have current registration. Mrs. Patterson was sobbing. I just haven't had time to get to the DMV. My sister's been in the hospital, and I've been caring for her. Rules are rules, Jeffrey said blandly. The fine is $200, plus towing and impound fees. By now, several other neighbors had gathered. The tow truck operator looked uncomfortable with the audience. This is absurd, I said. She just needs a few days to renew her registration. Kathy stepped closer to me, lowering her voice. This is what happens when people challenge me, Victor. First you, now everyone thinks they can ignore the covenant. Order needs to be restored. By targeting a 78-year-old widow? I responded, loud enough for others to hear. This isn't about order. It's about control and money. Her eyes flashed. Be careful, Mr. Steele. Landowner or not, there are many ways to make your life difficult. Something in her tone, a confident malice, made me realize she was planning something beyond this incident. I turned to the tow truck operator. Sir, I'm formally requesting, as the property owner, that you unbook that vehicle and leave the premises immediately. The man looked confused. The HOA called me. The HOA doesn't own this property, I stated firmly. I do. And you're trespassing. Kathy laughed. This again? You can't just claim, I have the deeds at home. I interrupted. I'd be happy to show them to you, I told the tow truck operator. Or you can take my word, leave now with no issues, and avoid being part of a potential lawsuit. The man looked between us, clearly sensing he was in the middle of something complicated. Look, I don't want any trouble. Then unhook the car, I said firmly. After a moment's hesitation, he began disengaging the towing equipment. Kathy's face contorted with rage. You can't do this. We have regulations. Your regulations only govern the structures and surface rights, not the property itself, I reminded her. And using HOA authority to conduct what amounts to personal vendettas is an abuse of power. As the tow truck drove away empty, the gathered neighbors broke into applause. Mrs. Patterson hugged me tearfully, promising to renew her registration immediately. Kathy and Jeffrey retreated, but not before Kathy hissed, "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." She was right about that, but not in the way she imagined. 2 days later, at 6:30 a.m., I was enjoying coffee on my front porch when 3 police cars pulled up to Kathy's house. From my vantage point, I watched as officers approached her door, spoke briefly with her, and then escorted her and Jeffrey, both still in robes, to separate vehicles. My phone rang. It was Megan. "Are you seeing this?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. "I think the Financial Crimes Unit moved faster than expected." Later that day, the news broke across the community. Kathy Enfield and Jeffrey Pierce had been arrested on multiple charges of embezzlement, financial fraud, and misappropriation of funds. The district attorney's office had tracked over $140,000 diverted from HOA accounts to personal use over the past 18 months. The investigation had revealed even more than we'd initially discovered. Kathy had been running similar schemes in 2 other communities where she'd previously served on HOA boards. She'd moved from development to development, each time establishing herself in a position of authority, then systematically extracting money through excessive fines and diverted funds. The most disturbing discovery came from Jeffrey's computer, a spreadsheet tracking acquisition targets. Homes Kathy was systematically targeting with fines and violations, pushing owners toward financial distress so she could acquire the properties at below-market rates through her real estate business. My home had been near the top of her list. In the aftermath, an emergency meeting of homeowners voted to establish an interim HOA board, with Megan as temporary president. Their first act was to rescind all outstanding fines pending review, followed by a commitment to complete financial transparency. As for me, I finally had to formally address my ownership of the valley. With Stan's help, I established a more transparent arrangement. Homeowners would continue to have permanent residence rights. The HOA would maintain legitimate authority over community standards and common areas, but the land itself would remain in trust, with a portion of any future development rights dedicated to conservation and affordable housing. The next Saturday at the farmers' market, I had my most successful day ever. Neighbors who had never visited before came by to buy vegetables and share their relief about the changes in our community. Mrs. Patterson brought me a homemade apple pie. "You saved more than just my car that day," she told me. "You saved our neighborhood." As the summer progressed, something remarkable happened in Pinecrest Estates. Neighbors who had barely spoken began helping each other with projects. Community workdays restored the playground and pool area. Several residents even started their own small vegetable gardens, coming to me for advice on soil and seeds. One evening, as I was weeding my tomato plants, Linda's daughter Emma brought over a hand-painted sign she'd made for my garden stand. Steele Valley Vegetables, feeding the community. Mom said you own the whole valley, but you never told anyone because you didn't want to seem special, Emma said. I think that's cool. I smiled, admiring her artwork. Sometimes the most valuable things aren't meant to be used for power, just for helping when it's needed. She nodded solemnly. Like vegetables. Exactly like vegetables, I agreed. That fall, when the last tomatoes had been harvested and the garden was prepared for winter, the new HOA board asked if I would help draft guidelines for community gardens throughout Pinecrest. The former "no visible food plants" rule was replaced with sensible standards that encourage sustainable gardening while maintaining neighborhood aesthetics. As I stood in my garden on the first frosty morning of October, looking out over the valley my family had stewarded for generations, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. My grandfather had been right about living simply and revealing the truth only when necessary. But he hadn't mentioned how good it would feel to use that truth to help restore a community. The land beneath our feet matters, but what we build together matters more. In Steele Valley, we were finally building something worthwhile.